Welcome to the Superhumanize podcast. I'm your host, Ariane Sommer, and in this episode, we explore the frontier of health that's been quietly shaping our biology all along, the world of glycans. My guest is Nikolina Lauc, co-founder and CEO of GlycanAge, a pioneering biotech company using glycan biomarkers to measure biological age and predict long-term health outcomes. Her work is helping to shift the paradigm of aging from something we passively endure to something we can actively understand and even influence. We dive into what glycans are, these complex sugar molecules that modify proteins and silently direct processes like inflammation, immunity, and aging. Nikolina explains how they reveal a layer of biological communication most of us have never heard of, and how listening to that hidden language can help us prevent disease years before it begins. We also explore GlycanAge's breakthrough menopause biomarker, their personalized approach to longevity, and what it means to raise awareness around women's health in a data-driven age. If you've ever wanted to go deeper than genetics, if you've sensed there is more to your body story than your DNA, this episode may open a new door for you.
Superhumanize. Accelerated evolution.
Nina, welcome to the Superhumanize podcast. I am so happy we get to connect today.
Thank you for having me. Very glad to be here.
Absolutely. Your work is simply fascinating. I had a couple of really great conversations with some of your other fantastic team members over the course of the last months. And your work with GlycanAge, what you're doing, has brought significant attention to the field of glycomics. So glycans, which are, I'm going to have you explain this just a little bit, probably much better than I can, but I understand they're complex carbohydrates, so sugars attached to proteins, and they are crucial to countless biological processes. And studies have shown that these structures, these glycan structures, actually provide insights into aging and also disease progression, like mind-blowing stuff. Can you start this conversation by explaining to us what glycans are and how they function within our bodies, Nina, please?
Yeah, no, actually, that's a very good description. Usually people know far less than that. I think you did some good homework. They're complex carbs, or glycobiology is the biology of sugars. And actually, the science was developed by my dad. He's the second most published glycobiologist globally. So he's been obsessed with glycans since he was 20, when he a lab doing glycan analysis. So it's been a theme. Something I've heard about since I was a small child, because I spent a lot of time in the labs as well, which was fun. I think all of us did as kids. They didn't really have babysitters, but it took me actually a while to get, because I didn't pursue biology myself. So it took me a while to actually get into it. And it was a nice combination of, I have a tech background, building on top of the science that he's developed over the last couple of decades. So they stumbled onto this completely by accident on the aging side. It was maybe 13, 14 years ago. I was 19 at the time. He told me he can measure aging on a molecular level by looking at glycans. And actually, quite a while, more than 10 years ago now, he wrote this paper that glycans are a third revolution in evolution. So they're the reason we have multicellular life. So any process you look at since multicell life has glycans as a key enabler of biology to communicate. So all cell-to-cell communication happens through glycans. And then all of our molecules, also since multicell life, are, for example, glycoproteins or glycolipids. So they develop together with the sugar part that gives them additional function and would change how proteins work beyond the genetic influence and beyond the epigenetic influence. So it's a way we evolved that we can change ourselves or how our body is functioning without having to change our genes and without having to make a new protein. You're actually changing function of this glycan real time, taking in all of this genetic background and incorporating immediate environmental influences. So it's a very interesting addition we added to our biology to increase complexity, and increases our complexity magnitudes more than our genome. So by accident, he stumbled onto this aging clock, which is one of the oldest molecular clocks we have that would measure aging on a systemic level. So it was actually published the same time as the first epigenetic clock was published, which has been way more popularized because you have lots of labs looking at the epigenome, and you have very few labs globally looking at the glycome. And they're not yet broadly popularized as other parts of biology have been now. So they mainly go neglected. But now, last year, we had the first Nobel Prize in the field. Carolyn Bertozzi, her work is mainly focused on cancer research, was showing basically how glycans on cell surface would disguise cancer cells for them to evade our immune system. So, which area you want to dive into?
So many. I think one area, and what you just brought up, is so crucial, and I think would really to give the audience a taste of the amazing power and prediction power of testing glycans. What your company does, what GlycanAge with the tests that you do, you have the ability to predict health issues years in advance, insulin resistance or even cardiovascular disease, and that's groundbreaking. Studies have indicated that certain glycan changes can be detected way before clinical symptoms appear. I think in the case of diabetes, it's like up to 10 years before. Can you share more about how do glycan biomarkers predict future health conditions, and what are some of the most significant issues they can foresee?
Yeah, so our technology measures IgG glycosylation, so that's very complex as a term. It's a key protein that we produce, which is created by our adaptive immune system, and it's the way our immune system ages. And then a lot of disease has a common cause. And in this case, it's chronic inflammation. So we look at most diseases we suffer from and we die from, 3 out of 5 causes will be related to chronic inflammation or a condition related to it. And at the moment, clinically, we look at inflammation as a side effect of disease. But here, because it's a very early molecular level and glycans would change the function of your antibodies, so they'll make them more pro-inflammatory or anti-inflammatory, you're really looking at this very early shift, or something we call low-grade systemic sterile inflammation. Doesn't need an infectious cause, it's not acute, which would then turn into cardiovascular disease, metabolic disease, cancer risk, an overreaction to something you shouldn't respond, autoimmunity, and a reaction to infectious disease. So it's most things that we would suffer from. And if we look at it just as a general aging mechanism, it's a risk for mortality or morbidity. So if your immune system is aging quicker than it should, then you're overall increasing your health risks. But then also certain diseases have very distinct, we call them glycosylation patterns. So they'll have, because glycans are like a language around your molecules and cells that enable them to communicate. And cardiovascular disease has a very distinct signature. And we see that the signature would shift 6 years before hypertension. So that's 6 years in advance to what healthcare will diagnose you today. We can preempt and say this person with 98% accuracy. So not just that they're a predictive marker, they're also a very accurate one, or we can, for the first time, look at inflammation as a risk factor and a specific risk factor or different risks. With rheumatoid arthritis or some autoimmune conditions, we would see the signature change 10 years ahead of time. With 92% accuracy. And there's a whole cascade. We published this review paper last year where we looked at all of the conditions that are related to IgG glycosylation, or what goes into the aging clock, that would have glycan changes. And there were over 72 diseases known to date, which would have distinct glycan changes.
Wow.
So I was just going to say, it's a very powerful tool for us to preempt problems way ahead of time. And in some cases, we already know how to prevent them. So not just that we did the research showing how we can predict hypertension or insulin resistance, we've also shown that these patterns For example, for cardiovascular disease, they respond to exercise. So you can tell somebody you have this particular cardio risk. But if you start to exercise or increase the amount you're exercising, you can actually measure how well you're doing in changing that risk. Same as for diabetes, we see what predicts it responds to weight loss and dietary changes. So you can finally be proactive about something versus only getting to know that you have a problem when you have a diagnosis and when you have to go on a drug for the rest of your life.
Exactly. And that's what I love so much about what you and your father, your team do, Nina. It's the one thing is to become aware of something. The beauty is it's not, oh my God. It's like, oh, thank God. Now I know. Now I actually can do something to take back control, to have agency over my health, and to proactively do something to not only extend my lifespan to live longer, but also to extend and to course correct if course correcting is needed. So I can also extend my health span, because we don't only want to live longer, we want to live longer, not bedridden, not having all these ailments that then amount to tons of stuff where we can't enjoy life fully anymore, whether it's cognitively or physically. And I think it's such an incredible tool, and it's fascinating how lifestyle can influence glycans. And I think what you recommend, you can actually pretty much in real time see what's happening. I think you recommend to, when you take your first test and then you do certain lifestyle modifications, to 3 months later test, or 6 months later, you get even more information. But like you mentioned, changes in diet and exercise and stress levels have shown to affect glycan structures and potentially reversing a lot of these aging processes. Can you discuss some particular lifestyle changes and how they impact glycans? You mentioned in a conversation that I listened to, there's a study out, right, about diet and nutrition and how it's not one recipe for all, basically, but it really depends on your particular body, your particular genetic setup. I'd love to hear more about that.
Yes. So the most complex, glycans have a potential to enable us to do preventative and personalized healthcare. Because one, they can preempt something. Second, they can tell us how well we're responding to any intervention, exercise, drug. Now, we don't yet have enough studies. We have a lot. We have 300 peer-reviewed papers, and we start from diet to multitudes of diseases, drug responses, pretty much psychology, as far as you want to go. But predicting how you will respond to a certain diet or exercise regime or drug is pretty much impossible today. Nobody has the technology to do. There's very little of that, a little in pharmacogenomics, but majority of the time, when you go on a diet or any lifestyle change drug, you are experimenting and seeing if you will or you will not respond to something. So when we would look at weight loss broadly or caloric restriction in overweight populations, so not underweight, we see a positive response in glycans. But we've done that with extreme caloric restrictions, so 800 calories a day for 8 weeks, which you can't really maintain. So in this study, after this 8 weeks of starvation, their intervention was putting people on specific healthy diets, so high protein, high carb, high fat, different combinations, to see if they can find maintenance diets that would work for different people. And what they discovered is that pretty much in all of these maintenance diets, even high carb, half people would respond with positive changes, so reduction in inflammation and the aging process. Half would respond with a negative shift. So there was no one size fits all, and it's pretty much 50-50 that you're going to respond well or poorly to a certain diet. And in a way, you have to do your own learning to see what works for your body and what doesn't. And that's why you have such fierce debates in the nutrition community, where everybody comes up with this new groundbreaking diet that's going to help everyone, but it helps some people and might actually be doing harm to others. And that's the confusing bit. Yes, keto might work brilliantly for you, but it actually might be damaging somebody else's health. So that's the complexity. Same as with exercise. When you do these big studies, you can come up with some general rules saying, 90 minutes of strength training per week or something like that. But if you apply to the individual, you're never going to see this average response. Most people will be in a different range. So when we study physical activity, if we look at athletes, they generally do more harm than good because they're pushing their body to a limit. And this is why their careers are so short and they have so many injuries and so many health consequences after a professional athletic career. So when we look at them longitudinally as they compete with competitions, they would spike up high in biological age and in chronic inflammation, but then they would recover after competing, and with time, they accumulate some of this damage. If you look at people who are not training to be a pro athlete and they exercise moderately, they have some of the best results. And recently we did this review. There was about 1,000 people in different cohorts. So people who have never exercised and who are a little bit overweight, people who are just starting to exercise, moderate exercisers, and professional athletes. And when we compared people who were overweight and are sedentary, they had the same inflammation profiles as a professional athlete. So by overdoing something that's generally healthy, you're actually doing more harm than good. While people who moderately exercise were the youngest of all cohorts.
So I have a question for you. I don't know if there's an answer to that yet, but let's take this example of people who are obese and sedentary and professional athletes. In each of these extremes, let's say the professional athlete starts exercising less and also less caloric restriction if they're doing that actually. And the obese person starts moderately exercising and also adjusting what they eat. Who would actually, it also depends on the person. So I don't even know if this is actually a good question, but in theory, who do you think would recover more quickly from their previous lifestyle?
Oh, so we see that people who are starting to exercise, and we've done young cohorts in spring training. This was all male cohort, and they all got younger, but these were like 30s something, former sports school. So they were used to a certain amount of training and their body didn't see any damage for it. But when we did a cohort of people between 40 and 60 who've never trained in their lives before, and we put 1,000 of them in the gym with young PTs, all of them overtrained and became pro-inflammatory. So I have a theory, we don't have the study for it, that the professional athlete who reduces his training, or the person who goes to the gym 5 times and reduces to 3, but lives a very good lifestyle around it and has many healthy habits to add on top of it, would benefit more than somebody just starting to build muscle in their body. But that's theory, But one thing you mentioned, caloric restriction. We had a female bodybuilding cohort where we had half of them, 40 women, half of them on caloric restriction and intense exercise, and the other half just intense exercise in preparation for a competition. And both cohorts would be pro-inflammatory on every level, glycan, gene expression, all other inflammatory markers. They lose their cycle, they lose bone density. There is a whole cascade of negative effects of professional bodybuilding, particularly in women. But when we follow them up 3 months afterwards, the one who dieted and exercised at the same time, they stayed pro-inflammatory 3 months later. The ones who just exercised, they recovered. So this idea of adding stress on top of stress. You're forcing your body to grow muscle and then you're starving it at the same time. I think this is going to become an outdated theory of how we actually build muscle and lose weight and everything else, because it's not so simple in our biology. We can't just burn out a bad diet. And I think that's been sold to us by the food industry for a very long time.
Oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense, Nina. And it brings up 2 things in my mind. I was just recently reading on, I forgot his name, a gentleman who's very successful on social media. I think he's a former Marine, and he now focuses specifically on women, menopausal women, supporting them into building healthy habits and working out. And he said, look, there's 2 phases here. We're not going to build muscle and starve yourself. So you just got to trust me on this. We're going to build muscle first, and you're going to eat and healthy foods, of course, but you're not going to restrict yourself calorically. You're going to eat in a certain caloric window. So you're not going to overeat, but you're also not going to undereat, but you're going to feed yourself enough so you can also build muscle, because you'll need a lot of energy, calories to build these precious muscles. And then once you have built the muscle, this will take about half a year, maybe to a year, depends on the individual. Then we'll start caloric restriction and also modify the training. Made a lot of sense to me, especially for women. We function a little bit differently than men. Our hormones are different. I made a new friend recently. That's the second thing that came up in my mind. Fabulous woman. Sat next to her at my nail studio, and I just admired her. She just gorgeous. And my God, I could see the tone of her muscles and everything. We started talking. And she shared that she became a professional bodybuilder. She was off to a competition. She won that competition. She also won the next one. So happy for her. And just out of curiosity, so if this is the path that you chose and that you're passionate about, professional bodybuilding, especially as a woman, how can you still pursue that path and make sure that you have the least inflammation, or that you can give your body enough time in between to reduce inflammation, but still keep on that track if that's what you desire to do?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's this difference between training for performance versus training for longevity. And usually it's a trade-off. So then if you're training for performance and you're pushing your body to a limit, you're of course gonna push some boundaries and do some damage. But it's about recovering from that damage, which will be important. So I think the measuring before and after recovery is most important, because you have a certain baseline before you compete. Then you will naturally spike as you're competing, and then you want to recover back to your healthy baseline after that. So that's what we're trying to do more and more as we follow different sports cohorts. And then it's also about finding what helps you minimize the damage. Is it a certain type of diet? Is it a certain type of additional recovery that's just going to help you bounce back a lot better? And I think there you can look at other events as also temporary damage. One of them would be pregnancy, because we would see women's immune systems get more anti-inflammatory when they're pregnant. But then postpartum, they age about 10 years in our clock, and they become quite pro-inflammatory. And this lasts up until the point they stop breastfeeding. And we generally see this in healthy cohorts of women, no pre-existing conditions, no complications. But then every now and then we see an anomaly where they see no pro-inflammatory changes throughout the whole journey. So it does seem that, and we also see the same in athletes. We see some anomalies where usually we would see them spike in inflammation, we'll see them be quite high and pro-inflammatory in their H-score. I can give you an example. So a professional soccer player could be between 15 and 30 years above on our clock as a standard, and that applies to majority of professional sports. You find an anomaly every now and then where they have no impact. And their age is much younger, their glycans are anti-inflammatory, and they just seem not to suffer the same damage as the others. Of course, they're usually an anomaly. They're like 1 out of 20. So finding out what's different about them. Is it genetic? Is it the way they're trained? Is there connection of their genes in the way they train? Is it some type of recovery? Is it sleep? What's in this that helps them minimize the damage? And
is it exosomes? Is it stem cell therapy? Nowadays, what I hear, what these individuals also deploy to make sure they function at an optimal level and also recover optimally, it's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, I think now we're trying a lot of, and there's also people who are trying to push boundaries there. Now with the Olympics, there is a new concept of Olympics, something called the hands game. So this may be too far a topic to talk about now, but the idea is that...
Tell me about it.
I don't know if it'll happen. It was just a startup that is coming out, and apparently they're going to come up with Olympics. I don't know if they're succeeded or if they'll do it, but their concept is, it's this transhumanist concept of 40% of athletes already do doping. Why don't we make an Olympic game where this is transparent? So we show something, we monitor for cardio events and risk factors, and we just see what actually enhances performance versus what doesn't. So it's dangerous.
Yes, it is. I agree with you. I think this is where there's a balance between ethics and biological freedom. I personally think it is my choice what I do to my body, as long as it doesn't affect others negatively. I'm just making this up. If I choose to put something in my body that makes me act super aggressive and have a short fuse and punch people in the face as I'm walking around shopping, then that's not good. But in general, these things are already getting done, whether it's in countries like China, whether it's even some research within our respective militaries to see how can human beings be optimized. And for the general public to also have an idea, to be able to at least look at it or decide if you're an athlete, if you want to try it. So for me, that while I have concerns, I think we share those, I also think this goes under biological freedom to a certain extent, and to not gatekeep certain things from the general public. Because something that I also watch is new technologies often divide the population into the haves and have-nots. For example, exosomes, stem cells right now. People who have a lot of money can afford this. People who don't have a lot of money cannot. But as these things get more developed and more accessible and cheaper, more and more people will actually have access to it. And the better we all function, the healthier we are, the net win is also societal. And for us as a human family, the less sick we are, that's how I see it. But yeah, I heard about that. It's an interesting concept. I'm curious to see what happens. And what are your biggest concerns with regard to a scenario like that, for example?
Let me actually give you an example that we know and that we studied as like a word of caution.
Mm-hmm.
I think the problem here is marketing or persuasion for people to do certain things. And one example is metformin. We've had a lot of aging scientists go on podcasts, go on big talk shows, and promote metformin as a longevity drug before it yet being proven out. And there's an estimate that there might have been about 1 million people who went on metformin as a longevity drug, off-label, potentially enhance their longevity. And now, as we're getting more and more data out, we're realizing that it's not a magic drug, as there will never be one magic drug that'll work for everyone. And when you're taking something off-label without an indication, you're taking even more risk than somebody who's doing it for a condition, because there's just a big and you're potentially not measuring some of the side effects. So we were, of course, very curious about metformin, and we got a hold of a few cohorts. And we got a hold of one cohort of healthy overweight people who go on metformin or testosterone, but I'll talk about the metformin arm. And we see that there was no statistically significant effect of the drug in this cohort, apart from in one individual. So let's say 10% of people could benefit who are healthy. And in this case, healthy and overweight, meaning they don't have a diagnosed condition. Then we did another cohort of diabetics on metformin and 2 other diabetic drugs. And in each of these cohorts, we see 50% of people benefit from the drug in terms of reducing inflammation, and 50% don't. So even if you're diabetic going on metformin, you have a 50% chance that this will at least benefit your long-term health in terms of inflammation reduction and the inflammation process. Or if you're a healthy overweight person taking metformin, you have a 10% chance that you're going to see the benefit. Now, metformin is a very cheap drug, and it has minimal side effects. It's considered very safe. It's been on the market for 50, 60 years, and it's off patent, so it's not a constricted drug anymore. But it does have some side effects. For example, it's known to lower testosterone, and you do need a healthy dose of testosterone as a man.
And a woman, also even for bone density and other things.
Correct. It can cause gut disturbances. Again, the big thing, but again, it can hinder gains from exercise. There's still debate if that's good or bad. That's an open debate. And there is some evidence that it can, I actually forgot the word for this, but it can cause a certain side effect in children, because it affects sperm. It would affect a certain deformity. It's basically development of male genitals in kids from that on metformin. And that has been proven out as being a significant risk. So there's a lot of, we're talking about a very safe drug, very cheap drug, very accessible, potentially beneficial for a certain amount of people, but it comes with a huge amount of risk. And usually when somebody goes and talks about it, they don't talk about these negative sides. They just show you the bright side. And also when it's prescribed, they're again just showing you the bright side. And I think we just have to be aware that it is self-experimentation and you should know both sides and get as informed as you can. And yeah, I mean, there's things which are far more dangerous than that, but I think it's a cautious tale.
Yes, 100%, Nina. And be informed. Don't have the rose-colored glasses on, especially when you're looking at a result you want to achieve and you want the quote quick fix. It's the same thing with all of these Mounjaro or the other injectables to lose weight. I have a cautious eye on that. I think there's a place for them. There's certainly people who can benefit greatly from it. But speaking about metformin, I have had quite a few friends out of the health and wellness and biohacker circles who went on it, are probably still on it. I've never felt attracted to try it because I don't need it. And for me, that did not hold any appeal whatsoever. And I have experienced what you just said as well. People are just looking at the rose-colored glasses, and oftentimes they don't even have a baseline and they don't check. So I think it's so important to have the data and to also integrate it, potentially different data sets. That's something I'm also curious about. We have so many different biological data sources. Some are better than others. Yours stands out to me clearly. And I think your unique focus adds very valuable dimensions to this approach to actually have quantifiable results that you can then apply to how you want to direct your health journey. How does GlycanAge integrate data with other biological markers? Is that something you do? And I'd love to hear more about that.
Actually, we don't integrate it. We would help explain a result by if you share family history, which connects to your genomics, if you share current diagnosis, other lab parameters. All of this can be helpful in figuring out where is the problem coming from, if there is, or where is a certain risk. So some of these associations, the disease-specific glycan changes we spoke about, they will be very connected with family history. So then that it is helpful in explaining it. But actually, glycans on itself, they're a very rich data set. They already give us a lot more than some other things in a specific way. Certain conditions have certain patterns. We're just about to publish a paper where we were looking at your glycan profile to predict what other traditional blood markers you might have abnormal. And we also had very high accuracy in being able to predict what routine blood work you might do will come out abnormal. So I think on their own, they give you enough as a tool, and other information is helpful, but you don't need to share it to get value from it. So one thing we started to do is instead of now every test comes with a consult. And then on this consultation to be able to explain something, because, for example, certain drugs would have a big impact, certain lifestyles, certain stages in life, menopause, pregnancy. You usually don't know this until you have the consult. And then when you have the consult, then you learn about, oh, okay, this could be related to menopause. This could be related to overexercise. But what we're doing now is integrating these things in a report that you can start to recognize yourself on your own, because they will have distinct patterns and we will give you the information in the report. And then more specifically guide you to also the consultants on our team who had the expertise. So we don't need to do this kind of questioning on the consult. You already come way more prepared. So I think what's helpful is doing deeper analysis once you have a result. So if something is high or if there's certain risk factors, then doing additional investigation is helpful. And this helps narrow down where you should look at. If that should be lung related, for example, we can quite clearly see lung damage, usually from smoking. We can quite well see changes in hormones so you can associate with life stages. And hypertension, for example, doesn't have many symptoms, and we have one of the highest scores in that prediction. So usually that's something that comes back very predictable if it does come from somebody.
Outstanding, Nina. And talking about hormones, and you just mentioned menopause. Can you elaborate on, I think there's something called MenoAge, like the MenoAge biomarker?
Yes, we haven't stumbled on a name. This is still, so we have a few years. We always see we always saw gender differences in aging, meaning men and women would have a different curve. Men would be linear, they just move in a straight line, and the women would be more anti-inflammatory to men. And then as they approach perimenopause to menopause, they will have this big spike. But we thought that happens with menopause because it happened around that age. But what I didn't know until maybe 5 years ago is that menopause is diagnosed retrospectively. So a year plus a day that you have now had a cycle, while actually this decline in hormones and symptoms can start a decade before.
Yeah.
And what kept happening to us as we were having clients do their biological age, they would see these spikes and we would ask them, could it be menopause? Do you have a regular cycle? And they would say, yeah, I have a perfectly regular cycle. It can't be menopause. I'm not in menopause. Then we went to a Twins UK cohort and looked at 2,000 twins over 20 years, and we had them in this menopause transition. And we saw that your glycans shift years before you actually are retrospectively diagnosed with menopause. And that's very connected to estrogen. Estrogen is a regulator of some of these glycans, and it's highly anti-inflammatory. Of course, the right amount. It's the healthy amount for you to keep your body in homeostasis. The homeostasis shouldn't be too high, shouldn't be too low. And what we're developing is a test for something I think we're going to call it long estrogen, or being able to measure your estrogen throughout the last couple of months versus if you measure estrogen directly, it fluctuates a lot on a daily basis. It would go from 50 to 1,000 in a single cycle. And then if you look at this normal range reference, so if you test on the third day of your cycle and you go look at the normal range, it's between 50 and 500, which is a very big range. So what is your normal? You might have been at 200 when you were in your 20s. Now you're in your 40s and you're at 50, but your doctor is telling you that you're in normal range. So you have no problem. But what happens as estrogen declines for you, whatever your normal should be, inflammation goes up in a very predictable way. And then as you put estrogen back, it goes down to a healthy baseline. So I think estrogen can be classified as the first known longevity drug. And there's hard data for it now, because there's been 20 years ago, there was this big study that we don't have time to get into, but you have recent data from the UK Biobank that looked at 406 routinely prescribed drugs and how well they affect the life expectancy. And they identified that 14 prolonged lifespan, and 4 of them were estrogen. Hard evidence. And you do have evidence on HRT reducing the risk of diabetes, many other chronic conditions, generally all-cause mortality. So estrogen is a known longevity drug. Of course, needs to be personalized, has some risks as well, but something that every woman will need in some capacity because if it's saying it's not a disease because it's natural, but it's actually the death of your ovaries. They do not produce what they used to produce for you, and it won't make much of a change if you take them out. And they're the fastest aging organ in the body, and it actually has a very big cascade effect on the body and different disease risks. But we don't look at it as a disease because it happens to every single woman. Things happen.
I love that you can actually see this years before, because this gives women an opportunity to actually intervene, especially we're talking about inflammation, and this would be like a chronic type of inflammation if this goes on for years, and all the negative things that can develop from that. So that would be a huge, amazing gift for women. I think that's phenomenal. And just to close this conversation, Nina, are there any future developments or applications that you foresee for GlycanAge, both in terms of technology and its impact on public health?
I think we need to take it step by step, because glycans are new in terms of to the market, meaning there's a lot of education around it, and particularly education to doctors, because doctors will not apply something until they understand the technology and they've been using it for a little while. So we have to go step by step, and we start with evidence. So we publish over 30, 40 papers a year. And more of that is real-world evidence, or done not in the biobanks that we started with, but with clinicians recruiting actively patients and looking at how do these biomarkers actually function in practice. So I think our first goal there is menopause, and then our most promising disease indications are cardiovascular disease related. There we've gone the whole path from association, retrospective trials, prospective, randomized control. We recently did a large randomized control, 2 randomized control trials with Harvard, and we've shown that we can predict events up to 8 years in advance, and we see gender differences in this glycan signature, which hasn't been seen before. And women are generally misdiagnosed because their symptoms are different, so they have a 50% increased risk of mortality. So I think we'll start with menopause. Menopause is still not a routine part of healthcare, but I think eventually it will be. And then our guaranteed ticket into, meaning healthcare will pay for it for you, is definitely cardiovascular disease. But since that's a very tough and hard market to convince, we'll focus on the women's side because that's the gap.
I love it. And that's such an important gap to close. I had a fantastic woman, Dr. Jennifer Garrison, on the podcast a little while ago. She heads the Garrison Lab at the Buck, and one of her focuses is actually the eradication of menopause, or at least the symptoms of menopause. If you don't know her yet, that may actually be a
I
very...
do know Jennifer. Yeah.
Oh, you do know her? Great. Excellent. Yeah, that amazing woman as well. Nina, thank you so much for this fascinating conversation. For people who'd like to learn more about what you do and also about GlycanAge, what's the best way to do and also reach out?
Yeah, so I think LinkedIn is a good channel. We're quite active there in terms of being able to reach to the company and sharing all our recent publications. Our website has a lot of information as well, and we have a separate side for doctors versus consumers. So just go on glycanage.com. And for me personally, I think maybe LinkedIn, although I do get quite a few. Quite a few messages. Yeah, but yeah, let's say the LinkedIn is still the best channel to go for.
Excellent. Nina, thank you so much for joining us today. I really enjoyed this conversation very much.
I appreciate it. Thank you for having me on the show.